You're listening to the Overfunctioning Leadership Podcast Brumble, leaving you with a fun fifth Tuesday's food for thought. Hello, and welcome to this week's Brumble. What does that mean?
I believe it's a brain rumble. Is that right, Zach?
Yeah, brain rumble, fumble, tumble, something. I'm Zach.
And I'm Alex.
And welcome to the Brumble.
Yes, and this is brought to you by Overfunctioning Leadership. And so Brumbles, what we're looking at is Zach and I just sit down, have a good time, kind of talk about like origins of this podcast or what it's about. This week, I haven't told Zach what it's about. Because one of my favorite things to do on the podcast is not tell you guys what we're going to do.
He loves to bamboozle us. It's just insane.
It's just like authentic, raw, emotion that comes behind all your words then.
I mean, what do you expect on your fifth Friday Brumble fun? That's a mouthful.
Exactly. So, I believe that we've introed it, and this is Overfunctioning Leadership. Would you like to know what we're talking about?
Yeah, Alex, why don't you bamboozle me?
Yeah, so, Zach, you were in Mexico, correct?
Yeah, I just spent the past week in Mexico on a missions trip. It was a great time, upper 90s. It was like the world was a sauna.
Yeah, so what I like to do, I've been on trips, John has been on trips, he's not here, anyways, so we've been on trips together, and I think it would be helpful for my question to you is asking, what is the use of cultural trips when it comes to leadership?
Oh man, that's a good question.
Yeah, you just came back. I thought this would be perfect.
Yeah, this is perfect. You're like setting me up for a nice little t-ball game. I get to walk up to it. You swing as many times as you need, and then
you hit the post like 17 times.
Yeah, and then it fumbles off, and the coach puts it back on, and then you walk to first base because you don't really know how to run yet.
Okay, so my question to you is, what are the merits? Like, what are the merits of cultural trips? How do they help your leadership?
First and foremost, I want to say that living in a cold climate culture, which means that we're very individualized, we're very all about private lives almost, and we choose when to share. I think of South Africa and Mexico specifically, but the more third world you get, the more you need other people, and the more you end up in warm climate cultures. And I think first and foremost, that's just an awesome experience, and why exposing yourself to other cultures is just such a relevant and necessary experience for any person's life.
So just overall, even when it just comes to the temperature itself.
Yeah.
But also you're saying something about socioeconomic status.
Yeah. So not just the temperature of like the world around you, but the socioeconomic culture in some part plays to the way that society revolves. So I'm not just saying like Mexico's warm, South Africa's warm, right? I'm saying like the people themselves, the way that they live their lives is like, in my culture in Northeast Ohio, I'm going to move out of my parents' house. Well, look, here I am. I moved out of my parents' house. I'm going to get married away from my parents. I'm going to raise my kids away from my parents, but with them involved in their lives, right? And then I'm going to die alone with my kids not living in my house, right? Like, that's sort of how it tends to go.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas down there, you have 3 generations often living in the same house. And they're very much a part of each other's lives. It's very necessary. And then you see that that warmth from within the family bleed out into the culture, and it just seems so much less private. There is a shock. Culture shock is a thing where you just don't understand why things are happening the way that they are, because what's fundamental to my life here and now is not fundamental to their life down there.
Gotcha. So it's giving you a new viewpoint to look at things, right?
Yeah, it gives you a brand new perspective, and it gives you more questions to ask that you can apply to yourself. We talk often about getting that eagle-eye view of your life and saying, why do I respond emotionally that way? Why do I do the things that I do when I do them? And when you enter into these other cultures, and you see people doing things in ways that you never would have expected, it just gives you one more question to ask yourself, I don't do that this way. How can I use that to better understand why I behave the way I do?
Interesting. So would you say, it sounds like, Bowen family systems theory would say that this is more togetherness than it is separateness. Would that be true?
Yeah.
Or is that just too broad of a stroke?
I would say it's a good broad stroke, but there's still nuances to it. For example, in Mexico, and again, I'm not an expert on Mayan culture because that's where I was. I was in the Yucatan Peninsula, deep in the Mayan jungle of Mexico. You know, the weird nuances there. And so it's interesting because there's street corners there's street corners and there's stores like within a block of each other. There might be 2 or 3, and then you go another couple blocks and there's 2 or 3 stores. And these are convenience stores. You're able to buy anything and everything from them. But you can't imagine that the economy necessitates those 3 stores. And I heard to some degree that it's like a social thing. If you are my friend, you shop at my store. And if you are not my friend, you do not shop at my store. And so you can see how there's a broad stroke there, but then there's that subtler, nuanced, how we live our life includes and excludes people in different ways.
Interesting. So would you say then, coming from a better socioeconomic place, such as the United States, and I've been to places such as the UK and Germany, there's more isolation because there's more self-dependency?
For sure, you just don't need other people involved in your life near as often. And let's be honest, people's lives are messy. People come with some level of baggage, some level of anxiety, and it just happens that when you add more people into your life, you have to develop those new homeostasis states. And so my friendship with you is technically more difficult than me never having met you. Now, obviously, now that I know you, you know, it's like I'm used to Alex. I choose to involve you in my life. And so in that same way, there's just that complexity of saying, do I need as many people in my life? And here in the U.S., if I wanted to involve my mother and my father more in my life than I do now, I would literally have to move closer to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, instead of them just being there, whether that's within your home or, you know, in the home literally right next to you.
Yeah, there's a lot more presence than you typically have here as compared to intentionality. Intentionality, I think, really takes the focus in cold climate cultures where you need to make sure that relationships that you want to flourish, you have an emphasis on the intent that you hold that relationship to. You have to make sure you're committed to actively engaging. It's more of a conscious process.
Yeah, but I would say that within cold cultures, I mean, I've watched shows about people living in Alaska, you know, and there's not many people living there, and they have to depend on one another, and so they know everybody too.
Right. Yeah.
It's more upon dependency upon other people.
Well, and that would be yeah, and that's a good example of how even though the United States, I would say, at least northern, is very typical a warm climate culture. You can see even within the same country that there are different pockets. One, it doesn't necessarily, it's because I live in a cold climate culture in northeastern Ohio doesn't necessitate that Alaska is also a cold climate culture.
Yeah, so let's talk about opening cultures. Like, why is it important to be open to other cultures? Like, is it just the perspective, or like, what can you learn from another culture when you go there?
I mean, you see different ways of life, and you see different fundamental beliefs, and the way that those beliefs explode into the way that people are treated. A very basic example might be in the Yucatan, in these villages that I go to. Part of what the group that I've gone down with has done in the past is they've sought out people with special needs and brought them into the forefront, brought them into the spotlight to some degree, to show them that these people aren't diseased per se, that they're not cursed by demons or whatever superstition, but that they are people just with special medical needs to some extent, or special characteristics, and they don't need to be treated in a way that is specifically exclusionary. And you see that has evolved because of just a lack of information. And so that's just one example of how even being separate from the knowledge that we take for granted here of the internet, of medical advancements of having a good hospital within pretty much a half an hour drive of wherever you are.
Yeah, and I've been to a couple different places that have similar experiences. So when I went to Laos, which is actually one of the few countries that's communist still, which I didn't know until I went there. But they are also a Buddhist culture, and so it was interesting to watch how much that Buddhist culture, the Buddhism, really changed how people live their lives. It was much more about being... So within a Buddhist culture, it's about calm and peace and treating each other well. And so, like, we rode mopeds, and people were like, it's crazy, right? There's no, like, lights or stop signs, but everybody's waving you on. Everybody's real nice, you know? So I feel like I was getting taken advantage of. People were just changed because of the Buddhist culture. And meanwhile, you know, I go over to Philippines, and it's a Catholic culture. It's a Catholic country. And you have to, like, watch yourself all the time because they're going to steal stuff from you. And so it's just interesting how those little nuances can change things. Now, I guess my question, Zach, is, like, we talk, you know, Bowen Family Systems theory. We really believe in it. We think the theory is really applicable. How is it applicable, like, when you went to Mexico? How's it applicable when you went to South Africa? Is it applicable or is it not?
It definitely changes the way that I approach people. I look at people, and Bowen's Family Systems theory is based upon the fundamental belief that there is more common to the way that people behave than there is different. So while we might react to our anxieties differently in a very specific scenario, overall, I might fuse with someone and you might cut off. But those two tendencies, that spectrum is common among all people. And when you look from that lens, it's very interesting to see which behaviors are predominant and which ones aren't. And I don't know, it's just, it definitely changes the way that I approach conflict too, and communication, especially when there is that language barrier.
Yeah, and I wonder too, because each culture is going to have its own different amount of anxiety. So in the U.S., seem to be more anxietal in how they handle that, because we usually are self-reliant. We tend to be over-functioners because of that, because I have the ability to do things, so I'm going to over-function in order to make things happen. So, you know, lace up your bootstraps and get in there and do it. It's like the American motto, is like the American dream is that you can do anything you want, which is a great dream, but it also leads to more over-functioning. As opposed to, let's say you're going to a third world country where the opportunity is very low, and so it might be a bit more of a struggle, I would say, to strap on your braces and get going, because the government, you're not being supported in some certain ways, and so it can be very difficult. So that changes maybe the overall outlook. I wouldn't say under-functioning, but it definitely, because I haven't been there, I don't want to make any broad stroke, because I'm American, right? But, like, I imagine that that's going to be changing things, and that's just the overall culture, because you can see from different cultures. Like when I went to the UK, and I was in Switzerland, and I was in Germany this summer, and last summer, as opposed to going to Guyana, which is in South Africa, as opposed to going to Kenya or Laos or Thailand or Philippines. Those are all very different places, but overall, you know, the anxiety is still there. And Bowen Family Systems theory is based off anxiety. It's just how they're reacting to the anxiety, and the amount, and what pressure do they have, and what kind of leadership we're looking at. And if you live in a small village in Mexico, is like, how much is family encouraged there? If family's encouraged really well, then you have probably stronger family stalwarts that can lead the family that way. So it's interesting as you look across the whole board, and it really opens your eyes to understanding that, like, this world is really big, and there's a lot of ways that people do things differently. But when it comes down to Bowen Family Systems theory, a lot of the things, like, it is the same. So Bowen Family Systems theory prides itself on being cross-cultural, because you can see, with this lens, you can see all the things that are going on underneath the surface.
Yeah, it's almost as if we as people, without Bowen's Family Systems theory, what we end up doing is we end up determining our behavior by the world that we live in. We build this little room based off of the government, based off of the family, based off down to the individual, and this final little box that we put ourselves in determines what we do. Whereas with Bowen's family systems theory, you don't have to rebuild that room every time. You start with the bottom, with the individual saying, I know that people behave and act and respond in certain generalities that manifest specifically in these variety of ways. And so while it's not a certainty, that lens and that perspective gives you a much easier starting point to grow up from, rather than, say, a Freudian view of thought. You really need a lot more checks on your box to determine anything.
Yeah, and it's not to say, see, I think the beautiful thing about Bone Family Systems series too is that you're not labeling people. It is a theory, and so theory is a lot based off of facts, but in itself is not a fact, right? So you can go into a different culture and you can learn different things about them, and you're not saying this culture is, like I even just labeled us almost, I guess, I apologize, as Americans as being overfunctioners, but you can start to see that and say, I think there might be this might be an overfunctioning situation that's going on here. Like you can just see it as that. And so what it does is it opens up your hand to say, I can accept different things from different areas because I can understand them better. And so there's some, a lot of people talk about when they go on cultural trips or they go different areas, they're like, yeah, it really helps me understand people and I can be more empathetic. Well, Zach, you know how much I hate that word, but it makes sense though, because you're trying to put yourself in the shoes of other people, which you can't because it's only one pair of shoes and you can't put your feet in the same pair as other people, but whatever. But you can see, you can be sympathetic because you start to understand their situations more. And Bone Family Systems theory helps you do that even better, I would say. And if you don't understand it, look, it's an ongoing process, right? But I love to travel. I love to get in different cultures because it's just so interesting to see how people grow up way different than we do. It gives you a good foundation to just being more accepting people alone. That we all deal with the same anxieties, and we pretty much handle them in very similar ways. Things aren't changing very much when we overfunction, underfunction, fuse, cut off. There's a myriad of things within Bone Family Systems theory that is across the board.
I mean, it's just great because you're building from the ground up. You get to know people, and I mean, we haven't even talked about the food, but who doesn't love new food experiences?
You just don't drink the water.
Just don't drink the water. Loved it when I went to the airport and you're in the bathroom and they felt the need to put up a little sign that says water is not potable. Do not drink the water.
Yeah. You also might want to bring some of your own teepee. Whatever. Anyway, so this isn't a culture thing. We could talk.
Yeah. This is just a pro tip. Bring a book that you want to read with soft pages, and as you read them, you save space. It's a little rougher, but it works out in the end.
You crumple them up, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm not a crumpler. I'm a folder.
Anyway, so I think we did pretty good. So yeah. I think overall we would say go on trips.
Expose yourself to different cultures, and that doesn't have to be internationally, but it's definitely easier. Even just going to a community that has different demographics than you. If you go into a black community, we as white people in a predominantly white America don't understand that we have culture and that there's ways to define that culture, but because we're in the majority, we don't have the language to define that. And so it's as simple as going into somewhere else around you that does things differently and just learning how they do that and being okay with that.
Yeah, ask a lot of questions, be curious. It makes the fun makes the world a lot more fun, that's for sure. So I believe that's it. So thanks for joining us for this Brumble. You can get us on iTunes, Google Podcasts.
Yeah, Google Podcasts, still Google Play, but I think they're making a shift into Google Podcasts or something.
So YouTube will be on there as well.
Just go into your podcasting app or YouTube if you want to see our pretty faces and Alex stirring a mug.
Dropping a microphone. And so email us at theofpodcast@gmail.com.
If you listened to this episode and liked it, come check us out on our Facebook page. Drop us a comment, ask us a question, email us. We just love hearing from our listeners. Alex, I believe sometime in the future you and I will be doing a Zammer.
Oh yes, of course. It looks like, because it's been requested twice now, Dances with Wolves, even though it's against my weird thing where I can't watch any movies that have any reference to girls and dancing is like kind of girly, but I'll watch it.
Yeah.
I don't think it has literal wolves that are dancing.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. But I mean, you watched High School Musical 2, was it? Did we watch the
I
second
did.
one?
It was like in quadruple time.
Yeah, it was awful. But this supposedly should be better than that. So
yeah.
That's a YouTube only exclusive content. So for that and our old school chat sessions,
yes.
You're gonna have to hit up the YouTube. But I think that's all for now.
Yeah.
So I'm Zach.
And I'm Alex.
Thanks for listening to our Brumble.
See ya.